What is up, gamers? Welcome back to another episode of GetGameSmart. I'm Steve, and we're going to be looking at 6 Redeemed Vel'Koz today. I've recently hit Masters in Teamfight Tactics, and I played the majority of my games with 6 Redeemed Vel'Koz. And I'm going to start the video by basically talking about Vel'Koz's mana needs and breaking those down. Then we'll talk about the team comp a bit more holistically. And then finally, we'll jump into a real game example where I can give you all of the positioning and tactical tips that you need to have success in your own games. If you're new here, please hit the subscribe button, and if you've been enjoying the content, definitely hit the like button. Let's get to it, guys. Some of you guys might remember this model from my Karma video. I have repurposed it, and now it is going to help us analyze Vel'Koz and what makes mana items so good on him, basically, and yeah, which one's the best. We'll get into all of that in a second. So first of all, with no mana item, Vel'Koz would cast every 8 auto attacks, and that is just horrendous. It's way too slow. It's really bad. Basically, if you're taking a look at this, you'll see that either Shojins or Dark Shojins is going to be the item that you want. Shojins is actually my item of choice. Dark Shojins is pretty good. They're both viable, and I think both of them are superior to the blue buff. In general, champions with 60 mana or more are going to prefer Shojins, and champions with less are going to be preferring a blue buff. So you can keep that in mind if you ever need to make the decision. But yeah, Shojin is definitely the superior mana item, and a few insights I want to pull out of having just played around with this a little bit myself. Is that Invoker 2 is very, very good for Vel'Koz. Basically, if you toggle that on, every single person reduces their autos per cast by 1. So, I mean, arguably it's actually the most important for Shojins because it goes from 4 to 3. That's a 25% change or whatever. It is massive, right? Anyways, Shojin is the best mana item. Dark Shojin also works. Whoops. And another thing I want to point out is that if you're using either of the blue buffs, Invoker is pretty much mandatory. And the reason Invoker is pretty much mandatory if you're using either of the blue buffs is that, toggle it off for a second, it reduces both your first cast and your subsequent casts by 1 auto attack. And for Dark Blue buff, it actually reduces the subsequent casts by 2 autos attacks. So another note is that if you're using a blue buff, you should be using Invokers all the time. And if you're using Invokers with a blue buff, Dark Blue buff is actually superior because it requires the same number of casts in both instances, and also has additional value when you're sub 50% health or whatever. You get more mana. So Dark Blue buff is actually better than blue buff if you're running Invokers, and you should be running Invokers if you're running a blue buff. And the final thing I wanted to highlight on here is that Shojin plus Hodge is actually the best combination. So Shojin plus any mana item is actually going to be your best combination. This is your best in slot, and it's better than, like, the reason Shadow Hodge, or one of the reasons Shadow Hodge is better than Gunblade, is actually because that first cast is 1 auto attack sooner. So your first cast for Vel'Koz is often your most important cast, and getting that off in only 3 autos is super, super good. So I hope you guys enjoyed me breaking down Vel'Koz mana, and let's talk more about Vel'Koz at large. Despite all the flack that people have been giving Riot's vertical synergies, there's actually a fair bit of different variances and different ways that you can play this composition. So I'll just up on the screen behind me, I've got the 6 Redeemed Ranger board, which is probably the most popular variant that you're going to see. So notably, you're teching in Nautilus with Rel and Leona to have Knight plus Ironclad, as well as Varus and Kindred for Ranger, as well as Lux for Mystic, of course. So it's a pretty strong build and one I would recommend, but it is definitely not the best board available to you, mainly because it's lacking Invoker. And Invoker, as I alluded to, is super, super important to Vel'Koz damage. So this next board is actually what I would consider to be the ideal composition at level 8. It might not look like much as you've only got 4 traits active, but believe me, they are some of the best traits out there. So this is kind of what I aim to put in at level 8, except when I was climbing into Masters, this was before the Kayle changes, and Kayle basically went from being a stall comp only to being like a pretty good carry in a more flexible sense. So I used to have Varus instead of Kayle here, but because we have Kayle, we have the Aatrox solo frontline. Prior to that, I had the Leona in there at that spot, but just a slightly better solo frontline, but Legionnaire is worth it for the Kayle. So we get Ivern in as like the most important tech to give us Invoker, and then we also get Volibear for Revenant as well. So one thing I did want to point out is that on my climb to Masters, I realized that Volibear on the third row is actually superior to him being in the first row. And the reason for this being that basically it allows the round a bit of time to breathe. It allows Rels and Nightbringers, etc. to cast their shields. And then Volibear's ability, of course, destroys shields, or does extra damage to shields, I should say. So the best use of Volibear is actually on the third row. But I think that this is the composition that you should be aiming for. I think it is the top performing 6 redeemed comp at the moment. I also just wanted to quickly shout out 2 other boards. One is a 3 redeemed 2 Spellweaver board that I've seen gaining popularity. Basically, you're getting rid of all of the lesser redeemed units and you're making up for the lack of spell, or the loss of spell power on Vel'Koz with the Spellweaver, of course, and you would also be looking to prioritize a couple of chalices onto your Kayle. So I think that this build has a lot of potential to be good, especially if you're able to get a blue buff on Karma, a couple of chalices on Kayle, and a Spear of Sojin on Vel'Koz, but that's requiring a lot of tiers, and it's a pretty high roll comp in that regard. And I'm also have just kind of been theory crafting my own board for potentially replacing Revenant basically with Verdant now that the Kayle changes have gone through, and then you would want to add like a Garen at level 9 to get Knight and Dawnbringer. Just a board I've been thinking about myself, and that might get popular at some point. But that is all just to say that I think that the best board right now is the Revenant redeemed board with Volibear and Ivern plus 6 redeemed at level 8. Let's get into how to play the game. As far as when you should play this composition, early insights or direction would definitely come from units in the form of like early 3 redeemed board or like lots of redeemed units, lots of redeemed pairs. But you can also get direction from your items. Specifically, if you're able to slam a mana item, that would be very good direction for playing this redeemed comp. In the example video, I hit a very early 2-star Aatrox, which I was able to throw a Sunfire onto, and then I hit a Syndra in my next shop to give me an early redeem board, which, with a combination of a tier and a needlessly large rod on my bench, I'm in good shape and have good direction to playing a redeemed comp. I think what a lot of players take offense to with the vertical traits like redeemed or forgotten are that the early game is pretty straightforward and easy to play. Essentially, you're going to be picking up all of the redeemed units in your shop, and basically you're aiming to pick up you're aiming to hit 6 redeemed as soon as possible. So if you're able to hit 6 redeemed by 3-2, the game's just going to be super, super easy. In terms of items that we're slamming, we are prioritizing our Vel'Koz items, which are going to be 1 damage item, 1 mana item, and 1 healing item in an ideal world. So in a very, very ideal world, we would be slamming a Shojin's plus a Shadow Hodge plus a Jeweled Gauntlet. But, I mean, the reality is it's more important to get items out early than it is to have perfect items. You'll typically be following standard leveling patterns during using this build, but in the example game here, because we are playing around our early 2-stars as well as slamming a Sunfire Cape early, we're able to win streak, and as a result we're going up to level 6 at 3-1 here. Another key thing that we should be thinking about during the mid game is who our item carrier is going to be. So oftentimes my item carrier for my AP items will be something along the lines of a 2-star Ziggs or a 2-star Lysandra, but in the example game actually at 3-3 here we roll a natural Karma pair, which is just too tempting to pass off. So we end up grabbing the Karma pair, slamming some items onto the Karma, um, and I was actually thinking during this game about doing a Karma pivot, but I was almost too far gone down the Redeem trail. So Karma for now is going to be a great item carrier. We'll get the Rabadons down onto her as well as a mana item. And yeah, it's definitely good to think about who your item carriers are, and basically Karma is the ideal one, but for the more budget-friendly builds, a 2-star Ziggs or a 2-star Lysandra works good too. Was a bit distracted during my 4-1 roll down at level 7 and didn't actually roll down as much as I should have, but at 4-2 I do end up rolling down a bit more, and I hit a Vel'Koz. I'm able to make a transition into my 6 redeemed board. As well, I've got Teemo in there for the Invoker, and suddenly my board is considerably stronger. And we have essentially survived the mid game, and this board will carry us all the way into the late game. Here we are at the beginning of round 6, so definitively in the end game here. Our board has served us very well. Unfortunately, I actually have Kindred in for Mystic rather than Invoker in at level 8, but the fortunate part is that I am wealthy enough to go up to level 9 here and get the Kindred in as well. So our board is pretty strong here. The Ironclad Spatula from the Dragon certainly helps as well. We were able to 3-star our Aatrox, so we were able to give him an additional defensive item, as well as the Archangel's Cloak, so getting a fair bit of value out of that. But more than anything, we are just happy to finally have gone up to level 9 and been able to put in our Volibear. In order to cap our board here, we would probably want to switch out Kindred for Volibear, and then we would probably be happy with that. As far as late game positioning goes, essentially you just want to have your Vel'Koz in the corner, and you want to have your Lux and Rel on the opposite side. So your Lux in the opposite corner and your Rel on the opposite side as well. And you want to have your front line slightly off center. So you want them to be your front line to be slightly off center, the same like towards the side of your Lux. The idea basically being that both Lux and Rel shield the furthest away ally, so you want Vel'Koz to be the furthest away from Rel and your Lux. And that's basically it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed the guide. If you do, definitely remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. And for those of you that want to see just the last few rounds of the example video here, we are just duking it out against someone running the Ashe carry Draconic build, which is very, very popular right now. Both the Zyra and Ashe carry versions of Draconic are very, very strong. And despite my best efforts, we are just not able to find a positioning that's actually going to move the needle in terms of the fight. This guy's board was very strong, but our board was strong enough for a second. And hey, that's how we play the game. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Cheers.